role within product management. I'd like to thank Zerto for having us along. How many were in the session just next door right before this? All right, so I can't use the same jokes again. I'm going to have to come up with some new ones. As Andy was mentioning in the last one, the folks at Zerto that have done such an awesome job of pulling this show together asked that the titles bear some sort of country music theme to them. So I'm sure that the next country music song that's going to be rising to the top of the charts will have to be Long-Term Retention for that short money. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Exagrid, our product, how we work with Zerto, the situations that we solve, the way we are cost effective, etc. I'm going to have a couple of case studies that are representative of Exagrid customers, what their need is, and why the two together provide the solutions. Hopefully within those case studies, you'll see or recognize some of the same issues that you're facing, which can then lead into what is Exagrid and Zerto doing together to help solve those. If there's a slide up here that makes no sense, please go ahead and ask a question because it's probably not making sense to others in the room. Otherwise, I will allow some time for Q&A at the very end. Oops. Exagrid, largest independent vendor, meaning that's what we do, that's what we focus on. We don't have any other products. We've been in the Gartner Magic Quadrant associated with being a visionary in the backup appliance, the secondary storage, the purpose-built backup appliance with deduplication and with replication. Fortunate to have a Net Promoter Score of 73, which is, as I mentioned in the other session, is sort of like in the Apple range, a very strong number. Hopefully, some of the things that I cover today will explain why we've been fortunate enough to receive that sort of a score. We do have a differentiated architecture. I highlighted at least one component of that in the previous session, but I will go into some of the others today. What we've done differently and why that makes Exagrid with Zerto together and what Zerto is highlighting at this ZertoCon in terms of the long-term retention they've brought through Zerto 7, why those two together are going to be solving the sort of problems and cost-effectively solving those. A number of industry awards that I'll highlight in a second. Significant customer base at this point. One of the things that we're definitely proud of is on our website, over 350 published customer success stories. These are signed. These are described by backup administrators or people in the IT departments explaining the problems that Exagrid solved for them. Some of the recent awards, the stories last year, and I think we're a finalist in the stories this year, et cetera, et cetera. And these awards are really in recognition of the Exagrid architecture, why it's different, and for you, what that means in terms of solving problems. So again, I hope to convey a bit of that today. These are some of our global customers across the world. These are organized somewhat by vertical marketplaces, but we really sell across. We don't have any specific focus on any particular segment. Also worldwide, we have sales resources, both the United States, across the globe as well. We are a platinum sponsor here. We do have a booth down in the Z Connect Hall, et cetera. So any questions or anything that I didn't cover today, please feel free. Also, in your Zerto app associated with this session, there is some literature, some collateral material sort of associated with that, with this session in your Zerto app. So rather than just going through that up here on the slide, you can always pull that down through the app, which I thought was pretty good. So here's a representative customer case study number one. In some of these cases, the customers were sort of reluctant to actually give their name. You can probably understand that. Not everyone is comfortable doing that, especially their lawyers. So this is representative of the problems that they were having, and again, what did they need from their data protection environment. Hundreds of virtual machines. The uptime is key. That's, of course, why they have Zerto. You all know that. Significant number of their own customers. All of the things that you've been hearing about having to provide uptime for those resonates for this particular case study. Disaster recovery testing, you've seen many of these things before. One of the things I wanted to start pointing out about these case studies is the need for the retention points, the long-term retention, the LTR. For this particular customer, they had a concern about what happens if VMs are accidentally deleted, if they're corrupted, regulatory reasons requiring data from many months, many years ago to be available for things like legal discovery and other business reasons. In this case, a pharma enterprise, one of their biggest requirements was a number of retention points mandated by FDA regulations. Very large data sets, as typical with pharma. Many of their VPGs in their zero environment had the same requirement. Significant number of their own customers in terms of hospitals and doctors. Once again, we see long-term retention of drug trial data. Being able to do analytics on that data. You never know at what point you might have to go back and access some data, at what point in time. And then a retention period-based data availability driven by the things that you see. So hopefully you're starting to see a theme here, right? So there's a need for disaster recovery. Zerto covers that well, but there's also a need in these cases for that long-term retention, being able to access that for a variety of business, customer reasons. So thirdly, hospitals, multiple cloud environment with these EMR applications using Zerto in terms of its ability to protect that data up into clouds. But once again, we get into the case where the electronic medical records are requiring the sort of federated view and then the long-term retention associated with the HIPAA compliance and audits. So once again, we see a need for long-term retention. Our history with Zerto, I covered this in the last presentation as well. We were a supported target in Zerto 6 and Zerto 6.5. That kind of backup was a fairly different, not flexible in terms of long-term retention, you being able to specify the retentions, et cetera, and also some of the other capabilities. So Zerto has really changed the game in terms of the long-term retention offering in Zerto 7. I know you'll be hearing a fair bit about that over the next couple of days. At that point, when Zerto was making the investment in increasing its ability to do long-term retention out of the same journal, Exagrid and the Zerto folks got together and we were able to figure out the sort of ways that backup data can be sent to an appliance like Exagrid for performance and for scale, and in a way that then Zerto can continue to build on as they expand their capabilities within this long-term retention backup space. So we're glad to be in the list of supported repository targets. I've got a couple of screenshots of that coming up. And then the organizations are planning things that are going to be necessary for bringing the joint solution together in terms of training the support organizations, training the sales organizations, et cetera. So overall, the story is that you still have Zerto providing the things that Zerto has always provided and the strengths associated with that. But now with Exagrid, you've got a cost-effective, I'll talk about that. You have a scale out, I'll talk about that, place to keep your long-term retention backups that now Zerto is able to provide. And I have a couple of slides on sort of how does it all go together. All the data deduplication is done by Exagrid. Doesn't bog down Zerto. It's all done within the Exagrid appliances. That's key because data deduplication, boy, say that 10 times fast, right? Data deduplication is a very process and processor and memory intensive operation. And so getting that off onto a dedicated appliance doesn't bog down. It lets Zerto keep doing what Zerto is able to do. The data deduplication that you need for cost-effective storage of these long-term backups is all done within the Exagrid appliances. And so really, when you have that need for retention in terms of weeks and certainly months and then certainly years, the only way you're going to be able to keep that amount of long-term recovery backups in a cost-effective way would be using a deduplication appliance. And then your choice of a deduplication appliance is very critical. And I hope to explain some of the things why Exagrid is a good choice for meeting those requirements. So you're able to roll back to events, data requirements in terms of months, in terms of years. Again, that's all because Zerto is making those backups. And then the legal discovery and the regulatory requirements. So this is sort of a first scenario where you have a pretty typical Zerto environment here on the primary site with your BCDR site. The journal located over here is available, as you're familiar with, but then starting with Zerto 7, the ability to generate long-term retention backups out of that journal, courtesy of the Zerto capabilities, sending that to an Exagrid appliance. So on that Exagrid appliance is that long-term retention, which is being deduplicated, and that's sort of like the starting point. You also probably have other backup applications that are running in your primary environment, and they may be covering the non-tier 1 or the lower tier applications. This may be a transition sort of state as you plan to utilize Zerto more and more in an environment. There's a whole lot of scenarios, but oftentimes there is indeed other backup applications that are protecting data at the primary site. They need a place to send their data for long-term retention, for weeklies, monthlies, yearlies. They need a place to do that that is cost-effective. They need a place to do that that is performant as well. And so you can park an Exagrid at the primary site, taking in the backup data from a various set of backup applications. I think I have a slide on the backup applications and the ecosystem that we support. And then, courtesy of Exagrid deduplication, those backups that are coming in at the primary site are deduplicated and sent across the WAN to the Exagrid in this location, providing you with 2 copies of the backups that are coming in through those applications. Because of the deduplication done by the Exagrid appliances, it's a very WAN efficient, lightweight replication. We only send the changes associated with the incoming backup data. All the time, you also have the ability to be taking in those Zerto-based long-term retention backups coming in here. And so in a lot of cases, you now have the ability to back up your tier 1, tier 2 applications, protect them for the things that Zerto does in terms of BCDR, but then also back it up to the Exagrid courtesy of Zerto 7. And you can now take those tier 1, tier 2 applications out of the load that has to be done here with those backup applications on the primary side. So that's a very advantageous thing. Why are you backing up tier 1 and tier 2 applications twice when you need to do that for just to get the long-term retention associated with those? You can now just do protection of your tier 1 and tier 2 applications, certainly through the journal and then also through the long-term retention. You don't have to include those in these backup configurations. And you're going to find, and Zerto hopes you find, that more and more you're going to be migrating the other applications into the whole Zerto protection scheme, reducing more and more your dependence on those other backup applications. You also have the ability to harness the Exagrid replication of those Zerto-based long-term retention backups by having them come in at the BCDR site. The deduplication is done here, WAN efficient, and kept at an Exagrid that you park at your primary data site. So now the Zerto long-term retention backups are safely in 2 locations, and you have the ability to meet those regulatory requirements, those business requirements of restores of your older backups at either location. And then lastly, to round this all out, you put that all together, and this is the good, better, best sort of scenario where you're having to do replication in both directions, where primary backups done at the primary location coming into the Exagrid, deduplicated and replicated. So you have 2 copies of your VMs and other environments that are backed up using the backup application. And then in the other direction, you have the Zerto long-term retention backups coming into the Exagrid at the BCDR site and then being replicated so that they're also available second copy back at your primary data center. Does this make sense? Do those scenarios resonate with some of your needs? I'll take that as yes. So I've been talking a little bit about Exagrid and why Exagrid is a good choice when you need to retain backups for long periods of time. Why is that? So I've got a little bit of an animation here that goes through 5 different considerations for choosing backup storage behind your backup applications. Everyone's familiar with your sort of starting building blocks. You have a backup application of some sort. This can include now Zerto 7, where you have an environment that knows, you have a software application that knows about your environment, that you're able to schedule backups for, control your retentions, etc. Exagrid does not offer a backup application. We work behind the various backup applications that are out there. And then you have some sort of a backup storage. This is where you keep your backups. Since we don't really, that could be tapes in some cases, but we're really now talking about backup storage within a disk-based environment and all the advantages that that brings. So as the backups are coming in to the backup storage, there's deduplication that's done. You do deduplication for that storage efficiency. You cannot keep months, many months and many years of your full backups on ordinary disk. It's just too costly, too hard to manage, hard to plan for growth. There's a whole lot of reasons. Everyone pretty well accepts the fact that in order to do long-term retention of backups, you need to do deduplication. And then, of course, as I was mentioning, because you're doing deduplication, you can replicate efficiently because only the changes are sent across the WAN when you're doing that replication. Okay, so that's sort of table stakes for backup application deduplication done in appliances. What are some of the considerations for how you choose your backup storage? First of all is just the time that it takes to get your backups done, the ingest capability of that backup storage. Another consideration is I would like to be able to restore my backups quickly. More and more, you're seeing backup applications that are able to power on the VM straight from the backup, boot the VM literally from the backup. No need to restore the entire thing. To do that, you need a backup storage that is able to return the data that you've backed up quickly. When you have faster ingests and shorter backup windows, you can start to rely upon a consistent backup window. And these are some of the considerations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exagrid has done some things differently associated with 3, 4, and 5. Yes, we have deduplication like everybody else. Yes, we're backup storage like everybody else. But I have a couple slides that highlight what we've done differently in order to take care of those 3s and those 4s and those 5s. First is the ingest that we were talking about. The ingest rate, ability, turns into how long your backups are going to take to complete. Exagrid is on the right-hand side in the green. Everybody else that offers deduplication in their backup storage is on the left-hand side using what we call an inline approach. So everybody else, as the backup data is coming in, has to do all that processing right then and there as the backups are coming in. What do you think that's going to do to the backup coming in? It can't help but impact it. It can't help but limit the ingest. Exagrid takes a very different approach with a portion of the Exagrid appliance dedicated to backups coming in that we call a landing zone. That acts like straight disk. So you have all the advantages of ordinary disk, fast disk, whatever you want to call, within the Exagrid appliance. And the backups land directly in that. The Exagrid software stays out of the way. We have things that monitor when backups are coming in, and we make sure that the entire resources of the Exagrid appliance are dedicated to those backups landing as quickly as possible. So that's that consideration number 1. Consideration number 2 is, well, what happens when I go to do my restores? Or I go to boot a VM off the backup. Once again, everybody else on the left-hand side, the only form of the backup data that they have is the deduplicated form. And so the only thing, or the only way to get that data back, regardless of whether you're doing a full restore or trying to do a boot, trying to restore a single file, whatever it is, the only thing that they can do is rehydrate that data, pull all the pieces back together, undo the deduplication, if you will, and that has to slow down the restorability. With Exagrid, you have your most recent backup sitting there in the landing zone. And so you're restoring as if it were literally straight disk, which it is. The older backups are available in the other portion of the Exagrid. It's a little bit hard to see where we actually keep the deduplicated data. Yes, we have to rehydrate that should you go to restore it, but that happens for backups that are a week old or a couple of weeks old. And you know that 90% of your restores are done from the most recent backup, which again, with Exagrid, is nice, safely sitting there in the landing zone. We also have it in its deduplicated form, but it's cached in that landing zone for fastest restores, fastest boots. And so that's consideration number 2. Third consideration is associated with a scale-out architecture. So again, everybody else on the left-hand side, Exagrid on the right-hand side. All the other deduplication appliances have the same architecture in terms of single controller. I mentioned this in the last presentation. All the deduplication processing is done in just a single controller. And so this has to be a very fast box, which means it's very expensive. Exagrid approach is to take all of the resources needed to do deduplication and provide them in a collection of appliances, collection of nodes, a grid of nodes, whatever term goes along with this, where each one has the CPU, the memory, the networking, of course the storage, but all of the other things that are necessary to do the deduplication. And so now as your backup data grows, which it will, we all know that, the Exagrid solution is just bring in another Exagrid appliance. Snaps in like a Lego block, and you've now painlessly grown your ability. And because it brings all of that processing power, your backup window is preserved both when you start out and even as you grow all the way up to 2 petabytes. With the other solutions, as soon as that controller starts to run out of gas, it may be fine at the beginning, but at some point your data is going to grow to the point where you're sort of exceeding your backup window just because it has to do more and more work in a single resource. And it's time to call in that forklift and bring in a larger controller, pay money for it, disrupt your environment, et cetera. So there are a lot of products out there that provide deduplication in a storage appliance. These are some of the things that Exagrid has done differently than all of the other solutions. This translates into scale-out performance linear. Nice straight line up there all the way up to 2 petabytes. You can see some of the other deduplicating appliance solutions down there. They may start off fast, but each one of those, it's hard to see the numbers, but each one of those indicates you have had to throw out your old controller and bring in a new controller, and even at that point, you're not able to keep up with the backup windows or preserve your backup windows compared to the Exagrid storage solution. So what have we done with Zerto? You've heard, I don't know how many times I've said long-term retention. You'll probably hear that a number of other times over the next couple of days, but that's really one of the exciting things associated with Zerto 7 and its ability to do the long-term retention as well as the journal-based BCDR. So this Elastic Journal, you'll be hearing that. There are some great sessions on it today. Exagrid can be a repository now for that long-term retention. The other thing that Zerto has done in version 7 associated with those long-term retention backups is, as the backups are coming in, to provide an index, a search ability for your backups. That index can also be kept on the Exagrid storage. So it's a nice, neat solution. And because that index is kept on the Exagrid, kept within that landing zone, your searches within Zerto, when you go to say, well, where was that particular file? Which VM was it? What was that VM that you know, I know it's named something. I want to be able to search through all my long-term retention backups going weeks, months, years. Zerto provides that capability with the version 7 LTR, and that is going to be a fast operation because it's being kept on the Exagrid landing zone. The virtual protection groups to which you add long-term retention can all share an Exagrid repository, or you can break them up based upon whatever administrative needs you have. So it's a pretty simple addition to bring in the long-term retention to a Zerto 7 configuration. So what does that look like? I do have a zoom in on that one particular dialog. So here you are within the Zerto setup page, a little gear icon thing. And you're all used to seeing tabs associated with VRAs and how important that is, and give you a sense of what's being protected. Now with version 7, you have a new tab associated with your repositories. And as you go to create a new repository, these are your choices, and I'll make that a little bit bigger. So I've got a repository here that I've named Brady. Any idea where Exagrid is based? And we're very fortunate to be listed amongst the storage type dropdown. Recommend using NFS as a transport mechanism. You also have the ability to use SMB, but NFS works great and is a performance solution. And then you just type in the path to the Exagrid. And all good repositories named Brady must have a share named Goat. So, and that's it. You save, your repository is now created. Oh, don't we have a keynote speaker this week named, what's his name again? So, yeah. And then, as Andy was mentioning in the session earlier, they've added just one more step along the way of creating a VPG. You recognize all these other steps. It's all the same. Not going to go over those. There is now a step associated with your retention needs. This is where you would choose the repository. Note that you can do or not do long-term retention associated with the VPG. Some of them, your journal is going to be covering all your needs. You don't have any LTR. Others, you will. Again, choosing the repository that you created before. And then here it is. You're familiar with this. When do I want to do my dailies, weeklies, et cetera? How long do I want to keep them for, et cetera, et cetera? And that's it. Zerto takes care of the rest. Once they're sent to the Exagrid, again, they are deduplicated, and it's cost effective. Some of the reports that you can get in Zerto 7, and I'm sure there's going to be some more sessions on this, give you that sense of, well, when did my backups run? When did the LTR happen, et cetera? I encourage you on some of the other sessions, hopefully they'll go into what it looks like to actually restore from a long-term retention backup. What's that search capability all about? You'll see those in sessions today. They all work just the same with the Exagrid repository. So what has Exagrid tried to do in terms of some of these things I've been mentioning? We think that the economics of backup is an extremely important concept. You probably face that all the time. What has Exagrid done that fixes a lot of the economics compared to, quote unquote, the traditional vendors? Sorry, that's a little bit hard to read. First of all, the traditional vendors will typically sell at a lower price and then jack up the prices as they go along. Exagrid has a price protection where the purchase price is guaranteed for a period of time. So if you need to expand, if you need to grow, you get the same appliances at the same price, built-in protection. The maintenance with traditional vendors is oftentimes accelerated. You'll discover that your maintenance costs are becoming a major headache associated with the costs, the economics of your backup environment. With Exagrid, we limit the increase of maintenance and support to 3% per year, and that's what we've been doing. In terms of how you calculate the maintenance costs, in many cases, it's a percentage of the list price with the other vendors. With Exagrid, it's a percentage of the price you actually pay. So if you beat up your reseller, if you beat up the Exagrid salesperson, get a good price, that brings down your maintenance and support as well. I talked a little bit about the costs associated with forklift upgrades and how disruptive and literally costly that is. I mentioned that with Exagrid, get another appliance, plug it into the grid, it's like a Lego. One of the things that's difficult with the other solutions is having to plan out how much you need to buy today. So what size controller do I need to buy to not only cover my current data protection needs, but my future ones as well? Because if you make a mistake and you buy the wrong size controller, you're going to get a surprise when you go to buy that next largest size controller. And this is something that we hear from people all the time. With Exagrid, we will size. We will get you going for your current configuration. But as things change and surprises happen, like they always do, if you need more than you thought, you can just go ahead and buy the Exagrid, snap it in, and you're on your way. Obsolescence is another thing that drives a lot of costs in the backup environment with traditional vendors. Many of those controllers, because they have to get larger and larger in order to keep up with the growth, the smaller ones are getting obsoleted, end of life. So you're now stuck with something that literally can't be supported anymore. Your data growth might not have forced you to do a controller forklift upgrade, but the end of life associated with the device that you have will. Exagrid has never end-of-life a product. We support all of our models forever. As new models come out, runs the same software, same capabilities. And then there's oftentimes hidden costs with Exagrid. The price includes the installation, which is typically done over the phone through typically a WebEx with our support folks. It includes all your full version upgrades. It includes the replication. It includes the hardware replacement. All of those are already covered by either the purchase or your ongoing maintenance and support. So no hidden fees, no complex licenses to manage. I was mentioning earlier that there are a number of backup applications that Exagrid does support. You'll probably recognize your favorite one or your least favorite one up there someplace. These are the ecosystem partners currently. Again, each one of these brings an integration that solves some different problems associated with what the various backup applications are good at. We've talked today about Zerto. I do believe there are going to be cases where in a transition period, you're going to need to support other backup applications, and you can rest assured that that'll happen with Exagrid. Again, don't have a backup software. This is what we do, backup storage with deduplication and replication. Just a quick tour over the hardware itself. Yes, we sell you an appliance. It comes with our software already included wrapped in sheet metal. That hardware within the appliance does utilize a RAID 6 with hot spare, so you're protected in that way with redundant power supplies, NIC bonding, et cetera. A series of security capabilities as well. These are listed either in some of the data sheets that are attached to your session today, or you can swing by the booth. We have plenty of literature that we'd be happy to give away. One of the other things that Exagrid does that's fairly unique is associated with our product support. So for the maintenance and support model that we have, it's primarily phone and email based, which is pretty much what you're going to need for backup. However, you are assigned a level 2 engineer. We have no level 1 engineers. You come into Exagrid, time to install it. You get assigned a level 2 support engineer, and they are your engineer for as long as they stay at Exagrid, as long as you stay there, et cetera. We do let them take vacations every once in a while, and so there might be a backup person. But the model here is very effective because they get to know your environment, you get to know them, and you save all of the questions at the very beginning, like, did you try this, did you try that, explain to me what you... The support engineer already knows that, and the support engineer is making notes on the case, and it's their notes, so they are able to understand them right away. I mentioned that the deployment model is fairly straightforward, rack and stack it, and then get on a phone. The hardware replacements are all through a health telemetry system that we have, the health status monitoring, and then next business day. So all of these things are designed to get the pain points out of your backup storage solution. So, in summary, Zerto, its CDP, all of its strengths, the things that you are familiar with are still in place and now expanded in this elastic journal. You'll hear that term quite a bit over the next couple of days. And as a result, the longer-term retention are kept on the Exagrid. That combination of the Exagrid architectural differences with the landing zone and the deduplication process that gets out of the way of the backup, et cetera, all work together to provide a solution that has the continuous data protection as well as a scalable long-term retention story. So you get those. It's cost-effective because it's the things that we talked about. I mentioned the intelligent indexing, the search of your protected long-term retention backups, and then that low cost and that offsite retention. So that's sort of a summary in a nutshell. So what's next? We do have a repeat of that achy breaky backup session with a great presentation from Brandon at GW Health. He did a great job explaining what they went through and why he sees this combination working for his environment. That's at the envious time slot of the last day of the session and the last slot ever. So yeah, it's so good to be standing between you and your evening festivities. Also, I mentioned being able to get some of the literature associated with it, and then that we're over in the Z Connect hall. So that's pretty much the stuff that I had prepared. Any questions that I can answer for people? Stacy has a microphone back there to make sure that everyone can hear. So we got one going back there.
This might be a Zerto question. Do you guys support file level recovery?
Yes. No. So when you go to do the restore from a long-term retention, are you talking from the sort of the journal or the long-term retention?
Both.
From the long-term retention, at this point with Zerto 7, it's a full restore of either the entire VPG or the VMs within that VPG. When you go to do a restore from the long-term retention, you are able to pick which particular VM you want to restore. I've got some Z experts up here. Anybody want to add on to that? All right.
In future Zerto releases, we will have file level restored from the long-term retention as well. So from the journal, there is an option to restore specific files. And from the backup, in future releases, we'll have that option as well.
So let's say your journal is covering, 14 days or, a bunch of days. Chances are the file that you're going to want is from the most recent time frame. And so being able to get that on a per file basis from the Zerto journal is going to be covering the majority of the cases. If you need to get something from long-term retention, oftentimes that's for a legal discovery purpose or an auditing purpose. The need to get that back more quickly is a little bit less important. It can take a little while to have to bring back the entire virtual machine or VPG if you need an application-based thing to bring all of that back from the long-term retention. Once it's then powered up, you can go in and get the individual pieces. So the use cases of I got to get that file back really quickly is taken care of by the journal. The older stuff associated, again, with some of these regulatory requirements, et cetera, can come out of a full VM restore. Go ahead. You're there, so.
Can you specify a different restore location when you're doing file level recovery?
Different location for the file? When you go to restore the file, and you're doing that from the journal, right, can you specify a different location? Yeah. You say put it over here, put it over here. Same with when you're doing the VM restores. Again, either the VPG or the selected VM from the VPG. When you go to do that restore from the LTR, you can say, here's a data store over there. I want to put it over there. And there was a question up here, Stacy.
Just following up on that question about the file over restore.
Sure.
Restoring a large data set, partition size, what is the format you can get? If you're familiar with Veeam, you can restore entire partition, you can restore a directory, and so on and so forth. What does Zerto provide for options, other than a zip file, which I saw in the labs yesterday?
We enable to restore specific files or folders. The folders or multiple files will come in a zip. Specific file will just be downloaded.
Stacy, there's a question over here.
Hi, Tom. It's just a quick question. I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you. There's a golden rule in backup methodology about having 3-2-1, right? 3 copies, 2 different medias, 1 remote. You're the media type. I could know we can have multiple copies. That's easy. Remote is easy with a DR site, perhaps another data center, cloud. What's your solution for the dedupe data to be on a different media as well? in addition to yours.
Right.
Or-
So it is true that when you are doing either Zerto long-term retention or the other backup applications coming into Exagrid, and you replicate to another Exagrid, I think it's reasonable to view that as one media. That is not two media. However, those are two completely independent grids. They're both running the same software, so I understand that is a concern. But with some of the resiliency things that I mentioned in terms of RAID 6 and the fact that they are separate entities, even though you manage it through a single pane of glass, they're separate entities, you get pretty darn close to that two separate copies. You can lose the primary site with the Exagrid and still get all your data back from that surviving site over at the other location or vice versa. So good question, good consideration. Yes?
So if you're using Zerto for your long-term backup, Zerto, the ZVM is gone. Is there
Wait a
another
minute,
way?
what's this if thing? This has got to be when I'm using
Well,
it.
if the ZVM is not available, I'm wondering if there's a way to manually recover from those backups, or does the ZVM have to be available?
That's where one of the scenarios has Exagrid replication of the LTRs so that the ZVM on the other site is able to attach to that LTR and get your backups out of that. So if you've lost the ZVM at either site because you're replicating in both directions, you're able to restore from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just know you can manually recover if your ZVM is gone and you're not set up properly. You can manually recover your VMs. I just didn't know. You would require the ZVM to recover through Exagrid?
Yeah, yes, because the format of the Zerto LTR is really only understood by Zerto ZVMs. But, I imagine that with support assistance, spinning up a ZVM, even if you didn't happen to have one there or whatever, and attaching it to that LTR repository is to get a backup, to do a restore of one of your precious LTRs, you're going to be able to do that. They're shaking their head.
Sorry, in the same vein, what if you lose the vCenter?
It can be protected like any other mechanism. I'm not aware of anything special, but yeah. So you have a VPG with your vCenter. You use probably the Zerto journal to recover. I'm not sure what a 2-month-old vCenter would be good for.
I don't mean the vCenter itself. I mean all the VPGs that are now bound to IDs that can't be recovered.
Yeah, maybe we'll take that offline. I would like to understand that better, yes. Other questions? We have 2 minutes. All right. Oh, there's one more.
Other than really hoping the credentials you use, to store data in both sites not being compromised or figured out by ransomware, obviously it's hard to have an air gap in disk backups. Is that really the only way to protect against that? Is just make sure those credentials are not available to anyone,
Yeah, so we actually do have some literature that covers some of the best practices associated with sort of protecting, isolating an Exagrid. So we have, for instance, IP-based whitelists so that only certain IPs are able to access. Again, if something has spread throughout your environment, that may not completely cover you. We have a firewall in the box, keep up with CVEs, have a bunch of the passwords all locked down. You can change them. You can deny SSH access. So there's a number of things that you can make the Exagrid repository a little bit more safe, resilient, et cetera. Yeah, it's a challenge because you just have to every new attack surface, you just have to start figuring out ways to protect against it.
Thank you.
Okay, one last chance. All right, I'll give you all 1 minute back of your day. All right, thank you.